Welcome to Grief, Grace, and Gratitude. I'm your host, Rhonda Kemp. On this podcast, we will be sharing our grief journeys with one another. Each one of our guests will talk about the loved ones they've lost to overdose, as well as the impact of substance use disorder. As you listen, you could write down and share with us a question or discussion topic that you would like to see us include in our future episodes. Just as it says in the book of Psalms, chapter 34, verse 18, "The Lord is near to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit." My hope is to bring comfort to those who are crushed in spirit. As we talk about the shame of addiction and devastation of loss, we want you to learn how to survive and even thrive while navigating through the difficulty of grief.
Welcome, everyone. I am excited to interview and introduce Bree Schrader. She is with us today to talk about the loss of her brother, Jeff. And we have a little bit of a different perspective when we're talking to a sibling about grief and the loss that people go through losing a sibling. And what I've found after losing my daughter is the focus is usually on the parents. So sometimes the siblings kind of get pushed to the back shelf. And I'm just really thankful that Bree's willing to talk to us today about her lost journey after having such a devastation of losing her brother. So, Bree, if you want to introduce yourself and tell a little bit about your story.
Thank you. I'm thankful to be here and be able to share my perspectives. So it actually has been 17 years since my brother passed, and it's wild how fast time can go. And it really comes into perspective after losing a loved one, how much that time kind of, comes to fruition with you. But in 2007, I lost my brother to an accidental overdose, and we were actually together that day, hanging out. We didn't really spend a lot of time together, so it was a pretty special occasion. It could have been a God wink that, our last day together, we were able to hang out and we played poker. That was kind of a thing we bonded with, was playing poker, and it was fun because we're both super competitive. Wow. And neither of us like to lose. And I actually won that evening. And he was not happy. We had a great evening just spending time together with friends. We had a group of individuals over, and, he seemed fine. Everyone seemed fine. Everyone went to bed. And the next morning, I was supposed to actually be heading to a funeral for a coworker's wife that had passed. But knowing that we had stayed up a little later, I was like, oh no, my brother was going to babysit my daughter, who was 3 at the time. I was like, I'm going to let him sleep in. I'll send my condolences. I didn't want to wake him to babysit, So, and it was common for him to sleep in. And, it was about 2 p.m. in the afternoon, and football was getting ready to start. So I was like, you know what, I'm going to go wake him up because, he's going to want to watch football. And I wanted to take a shower, and I wanted someone to help watch Kylie while I did that. So I went to wake him up and was not able to. And I knew immediately what had happened, but you're in this kind of fight or flight. And he had actually had a prior overdose about 6 months prior to that. And just seeing him, I knew what was in front of you, but in that moment, you do anything and everything. So, you call 911 and CPR and all those things. And, once the first responders show up, they immediately told me, stop. That, there's no need to keep doing what you're doing because he is gone. So, in that immediate moment, you just kind of black out. I mean, it's very vivid, and I remember everything to this day, but you just, is this really happening? Like, what is going on? And you black out in that moment. And, fortunately, my parents were out of town that weekend. People are like, why do you say fortunately? I wouldn't want anyone, no parent should have to see their child in that form, and I'd rather it be me than them. So,
Yeah. Still, it still hurts. Yeah. I know.
So then So then you go into like protector mode. So immediately I was being protective of him. But when there is a loss that happens and there's no one present, they have to treat it like a homicide, which is a really unfortunate thing to be thrown into while you're trying to process what has just happened. And so I wanted to stay there with him. But when the police and the paramedics show up, they immediately kick you out of the room because they have to do their job. At that time, I was not respectful and not happy in that moment, but that was because I was being protective of him and wanting to be in that space. But thankfully, I had to call my parents immediately. That they did have me do it. Hardest phone call, hardest 3 words I've ever said in my life, um, to them. And then luckily, and I'm blessed that my mom texted my aunt to message our priest to see if he could come sit in the room because the first responders would allow that. So that brought me comfort knowing that our priest was able to be there during that time with Jeff, over him because I couldn't and they wouldn't let me stay. So, my immediate, I went into that almost like older sibling. Like in that moment, I took the older sibling role of being protective and being that safe person in the moment, and definitely different situation than if my parents had been in that moment and having to do that. I'm glad it was me and not them.
Wow, Bree, you tell that story so well. I know you've told it a lot. It's just never easy to go back through it, even just the remembrance of every little part of it. And I know we do go into shock in a way, emotional shock maybe, but just seeing him laying there and you are the big sister, so I know you did everything right, but it's just a devastating time, and I'm sure it took you a long time to even accept that he was gone if you're like the rest of us that just you don't accept it right off the bat.
Oh, absolutely not. I definitely suppressed all my feelings in that moment. You go and your body just kind of goes in whatever mode it feels in that moment it needs to do. And I definitely was suppressing a lot and continued to do that for, if not months, I'd say months. I suppressed my feelings and never really fully grieved or let myself grieve because I just thought I had to put on this protective layer because I was the sibling. I wasn't the parent. And I had a child who I had to be, seem okay in front of, who wouldn't understand if I was sad or crying and having to explain that to a 3-year-old. And then also on top of just having to explain to them why they're not seeing, Uncle Jeff while, you hide a lot. And I think that's more so with siblings than when it's the parent because that's expected. That's expected of the parents. And not that people don't think you're going to grieve as a sibling, but, the focus is on the parents and what they're going through. And as the sibling or the child of the parents, you kind of just go with emotions and just feel like you have to be more the strong one of the family in that time.
Yeah. Do you remember who came along beside you just for you? Was there someone that really focused on how you were feeling?
Well, as I look back, I didn't allow anyone to do that in my suppressing and in isolation and wanting to handle things on my own, and not wanting to be vulnerable. I didn't really let anyone come alongside.
Yeah.
I could say Kylie was there for me, but that's because I had to as a parent or take care of your child. And she was there to keep me busy and was my focus. But I shut anyone and everything out. I think I assumed I was okay and that I didn't need anything until like about probably 4 months after. And then I finally decided that my isolating, my suppressing, my anxiety, all the feelings I was having, the fear, I needed to find some support. And so in that moment, I was mad at God. A lot of blame and anger there. So I decided to try therapy. I hadn't heard great things and great success from therapy, but I was like, I need to try something. If I'm not going to do these other tools or resources, let me just try this. So I started seeing a therapist, Darcy, and she helped me tremendously through that. And then as time went, I learned a lot more about myself in that journey, but also just you lose your identity. So who I was before losing Jeff was completely different who I was to that day. And so learning to live life in this new identity and who you are when you don't even know who you are in that moment anymore. It's just like nothing makes sense. And so a lot of conversations, a lot of homework and things to work on, but also starting to allow myself to let people and other things help me, listening to music, going to church, whatever form that was. I didn't I didn't want to lean on those type of resources. I didn't think they were going to help me. I was just going to help myself. But in the end, I knew like I can only do so much. We can
Right.
we can only do so much for ourselves.
And you said you were angry at God. So did it really feel like God had kind of stepped away from his job?
Yeah.
Like why didn't he fix it? Why didn't he?
A lot of blame and anger. Like, what is, a lot of people would say to me, like, there's a plan, there's purpose in this, and there's reasoning. And in my mind at the time was like, what reason was this for my brother to pass? Like, I didn't understand, I didn't get it. And you're angry at everyone, but you hold on to him because like supposed to heal all and know all, and knowing that a lot of people from our church were really had shame on how he passed and how they kind of treated, the manner in which he died just left a bad taste in my mouth too. Granted, that wasn't through God, but through, our support group within the church, knowing that people were making comments like, well, he chose to do that. He did that to himself. Those people who have addiction, those type of very hurtful comments can leave a very, unnerving mindset that I had on the church and everyone around that. And it took me a long time to get to a good place there because I was very angry.
Did you stop going to church?
Mhm. Yep.
You did. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, it's that blanket of shame and this whole cultural view we have of people that have substance use disorder. It's not treated like a disease in a lot of ways. So you hide it while they're using. You don't want people to know. I know when Lacey was using, I was protecting her from people finding out because she wouldn't want that to be front page news. And then I immediately shared that Lacey overdosed. She had a great therapist and drug counselor that was a friend of ours, and he spoke at her funeral about her addiction. So that just immediately felt comfortable for me to just share her story about addiction. And I don't know why. I mean, I can't explain it except it was a God thing because God showed up for me immediately and kept me together in that whole process. So, but yeah, I mean, we're dealing with not only the loss of a loved one that is part of our being, you've lost a family member that you grew up with, and a sibling is your best friend from birth to death. That's what we expect to get out of a sibling relationship. They're supposed to be with you for life. So yeah, you feel cheated, but then you're trying to deal with people's attitude about they deserved it in a way. If they weren't so careless, if they weren't so, selfish or whatever they label them to be, and they just don't understand addiction. So
Yeah, but look,
yes,
it's just they're not
very hard.
understanding, but they're also not willing to educate themselves and understand. They're stuck in that mindset, and it's okay for people to have their opinions. We all have opinions, but there's also opportunity to embrace, the what is and these individuals and the fact that it could happen to them. It could
Sure.
be their child someday, their parent, their breeds, their. I mean, it doesn't discriminate on anyone. So it's unfortunate that a lot of people don't understand until it hits close to home.
Yeah. And it's like until you go through anything, you can't really speak to it. I mean, that's just true about everything, really. And that's why we're not supposed to judge and speak to every situation. But so you said it felt like you lost your identity when your brother passed. Can you explain a little bit more of like what was that? What was the identity lost like?
Yeah, just from going from, being a sibling. And the first part is just now. I'm without a sibling. I have no other siblings. And, what role do you play moving forward? I mean, it seems simple, you just keep being who you are and doing what you do, but that grief creates so many elements and layers to you as a whole, and you kind of just don't know how to proceed in life. You're kind of stuck. I felt very stuck in what I wanted to do, who I wanted to be. Do I share his story? Do I keep it quiet? Is there more purpose to this? There's got to be something more in what I need to do with this, because it can't be I just lost my brother and that's it. So really trying to find myself again and be find joy in things and find joy in that I had a sibling, had my brother who would but like continue in that and be a bigger part of myself than I was before through this grief and this loss. Because one, he wouldn't want me to just live in my grief all the time. It's inevitable. We're going to be in grief, but drowning in it every day and not knowing who I am anymore, what I want to be, and then just being angry and not isolating, because that's not who I was as a person. I was very, and I still am. It took me a long time to get here again, but just being that outgoing, carefree, I was irresponsible, obviously, at a younger age. I was 24 when he passed.
How old were you? How old were you when he passed?
I was 24, which
24. So
still very young. I look back and I'm like, my goodness, to go through that at that age, and even being a single parent at 21, I look back and like, gosh, that's a lot within 3 years, is being a single parent of a special needs child, losing your brother and finding him and going through that. So there was many layers to that. And then life, as we get older, life just takes over.
yeah, you felt like you were really getting your share of challenges. And I always go back to the Bible, just saying, we're gonna get stronger, we're gonna get better, we're gonna depend on God more and more and more. And where else is there to go, when things like this happen? To me, there's no other place to run to. So, and then having that church issue where people are not treating you the same, or so what did, I know you went to Darcy and you had some success with therapy. Was there anything else that really prompted you? Were there God winks early on? Were there things that helped you to heal besides the therapy?
So I started deep diving into volunteering. I ironically, well, when he passed, we decided to pick a memorial to have funds, go towards. And so we chose the Down Syndrome Society, since my young, or now oldest, but Kylie at the time happens to have Down syndrome. We decided to choose to have the funds go there for his memorial. And they reached out and shared that they had a local walk they did. And if they would love for us to be a part of it, because of us, you know, having the memorial go towards that and just be a way to meet new families and just kind of recognize us, because as that moment we were donors. And so I attended the walk and found a lot of value in being in something and participating in something that brought people together for a common cause. And I was like, gosh, I really wish there was something like this for grief in general. There was support groups, but other types of settings that, because meeting type settings aren't for everyone. Some people do better in different environments, but I really enjoyed doing that. And so I started throwing myself in volunteer activities. As I look back, I realized that was a coping mechanism for the grief I was in, is that I constantly kept myself busy. If I wasn't working or being a mom, I was a volunteer and all the other hours. So I started help put on events around town for many different causes. And that continued up until, I found employment that, helped individuals in recovery from substance use. So I stuck with volunteering and being in different communities and different populations that voices were not being heard, didn't feel like they had safe places to go, didn't feel like they had community, because building that community and seeing what it can do for individuals is so important, especially when you feel you don't have that. And there were no sibling grief communities. There wasn't a lot of different opportunities for me as far as within my grief of what happened to Jeff and around shame and stigma around substance use and the manner of his death, that I threw myself in other type of charity activities and volunteering, just to know that, through his death, I gained a bigger sense and purpose of being more intentional with what I do with my time and where I spend it. And so I threw myself into volunteering. I wasn't going to church, but I would still listen to Christian music. That helped a lot. But then I would stop listening to it because some of the lyrics, I was still very angry about the purpose and the meaning and the plan. And so I started listening to instrumental music because nobody was telling me how I should feel or what I should be doing. Or so I leaned on instrumental music because in my head I could create my own lyrics that for me felt comforting in that time. So that's what I leaned on. I look back and wish I would have journaled more. And that's why years down with your book has been so huge. I wish I would have had that right after Jeff, because even though we remember so much of them, we also lose. You just with time, you forget things. And so I wish I would have journaled more right after too and been more open to more resources instead of being stubborn because I was definitely very stubborn.
Yeah. And going through the journal, were you pretty good about recalling it when you tried to,
For the
or
most
the memories?
Yeah, for the most part, there were some things where I'm like, gosh, I don't know if we ever had conversations around this. And, we were 5 years apart. So he was my older sibling. But when he passed, I felt like I needed to fill that void. But we were 5 years apart. And so though that doesn't seem like a significant, spacing, it still was because, while I was in middle school, he was close to graduating. And so we didn't really get close honestly, till after I had Kylie. It's kind of where we grew closer because I was home more and he loved being around her. He loved being an uncle. And then we picked up playing poker. So we didn't really, we sibling bonded. There was sibling bonding, but as far as having like some deeper conversations about things, I never fully got to experience with him. And so some of those, I'm like, I wish I would have been more intentional when, he was living to just talk, not yell at him. We had a lot of banter. I was really good at bantering with him and being the annoying little sister, but being more present and mindful about our family relationships that, tomorrow's never a guarantee. And you really have to be present. And I've definitely learned that through this process, being more present with friends and family, especially.
So now when you're with people you love, you don't take it for granted, I'm sure.
I spend most of my free time, if not with my family, with my parents. My mom and I hang out a ton. Everyone's like, I have friends who reach out constantly, like, I'd love to hang out, love to do something. Well, if I'm not with my kids or my husband, then I like to spend it with my parents because you just never know. And, they're my best friends. And not that I don't love my friends, I'm sure if there was reversal and something happened to them, I'd wish I'd spent more time, but I'm definitely more intentional with my, immediate family and where I exert myself because for so long after Jeff passed, I definitely isolated for a while and I went out a lot. I wasn't making big choices.
If you really acting recklessly, maybe, yeah,
a little, yep.
So what surprised you the most if you could go back to that first, let's say the first 5 years? Was there anything about grief that just totally blew your mind? Like, you think of grief as sadness and despair and loneliness. And was there anything that really just hit you like, how does this relate to grief?
I think for me is, I found a way to kind of turn my pain and grief into doing something purposeful. And I never knew that you could, though the grief is always with you, and I don't want to take away from that because everyone does grieve differently. And some people don't find the positivity from the grief and turning, your pain into some sort of purpose. But I was surprised to find that I could still remember him, keep his memory alive, but do it in a positive way where there wasn't constant sadness, that I wasn't always in a dark place, that, there is times of joy and you can do things and make an impact in their memory by doing things that they enjoy doing, but not living in that darkness all the time. I think I thought, I'm going to suppress all this. I'm going to bottle up and no one's ever going to know what I'm feeling. I'm never going to share his story. And then by sharing his story, the amount of lives I've been able to touch in some form, whether they themselves had been through that or they themselves were struggling with substance use or they had a family member or that they had lost a family member and they didn't share in so many years. That's how the individual had passed. That sharing his story and being mindful and vulnerable in my grief, that there could be a lot of positives that come out of it. I definitely didn't see anything positive for a long time in that grief and what we went through. I went through. I say I, as far as in that moment when I found him, but we as a family after he passed, with the shame and the stigma and everything that comes with it.
Yeah. Do you think anyone's doing better out there as far as recovery services? It's from 17 years ago. Do you think the communities and the culture is changing towards the whole big ugliness of addiction?
Absolutely. I mean, there's a lot of, nonprofit organizations coming forward. There's a lot of education around substance use. There's a lot more people that are just wanting to lead sober lives in general. And though they didn't have any substance use disorder struggles, but they're wanting to live a sober life and talking about it more. I think a lot of it has to help, with technology. And then you have all these different social media apps where people can share their stories. And it's just, when my brother passed in 2007, the only thing that was really around was Facebook. And you don't share things like that on there. That's like unheard of. And so when I started using my voice to share his story, people were just like baffled. Like, I cannot believe she's talking about this. So since then, huge. There's a lot of different type of support groups because every lane isn't for everyone. So that there's a lot of inclusivity in different types of opportunities is huge and really great to see. Like with Hope is Alive, having the housing, but in a safe space around ministry, that's huge. Organizations like the Phoenix that has like the social and out focus, the fitness focus, because some people, AA and those type of settings weren't the right fit for them, but just knowing that there's other initiatives out there that might be a better fit for someone, because there's no manual to grief. There's no manual to how you, in my eyes, how you whether you say cure addiction or help or, for the fight, the individuals have to do what's best for them. And now that there's so many opportunities that fit different styles and personalities, it's huge because there was nothing then. When my brother had his first overdose, his comment to us was, well, I'm not going to go to AA. I'm not going to go to any meetings. I refuse to do that. I know what I did wrong. I just won't mix these certain pills together. So in his mind, he knew he thought he had control with everything, that he just won't mix a certain type of pills, and everything will be fine. He doesn't need any other resources because he refused to go to a meeting style. Now, if there had been a safe housing area that he thought he could go to with like-minded individuals, maybe there would have been success. Or maybe if there was the fitness because he enjoyed sports, or be in a social settings where you could be you, but in a safe space. That was unheard of then, at least in Wichita. In our area, there was nothing. And AA, and not to take away from that, because that's been tremendous for so many individuals, but it's not for everyone. And so now that there's different resources is huge because, we have to meet people where they're at, where they're comfortable, even though sometimes they have to get out of their comfort zone. But now that there is what there is, you're seeing a huge shift in the numbers than when my brother passed.
Yeah, I'm so thankful for that too. And usually it's because of people like you and people that have gotten sober. They're usually the ones out there making the changes and opening up those doors. It's always grassroots. It's not from the top down. We can't wait for our city manager to do it. It's got to come from us.
Right.
So if someone right now is dealing with a brother that's using drugs and alcohol and seeing this whole overdose picture in their future, and they're scared, what would you say to someone? What was the best advice you could give someone as a sibling to help your brother or sister that's dealing with substance use disorder?
I don't know that there's, any right thing. And in that moment, he wasn't willing to listen to immediate family. He wasn't, in his stance, it was us as family being nagging on him and telling him what he needs to do. But I think instead of coming from the angle where we came from, the angle is, why don't you just stop? Why don't you just stop? You just stop doing it. Like, why are you putting this in? Like, why are you taking the pills? Why are you doing this? Why can't you just stop? And in our head, we were so focused on that he had complete control and that he was choosing this over his family and that we had to experience his first OD and he got a second chance at life. Don't you think that would make you act? I say act right, but I'm talking how I was talking then. My shift has changed in 17 years, but I was like, when don't you want to act right and do the things that you should be doing and stay sober and bringing up Kylie and different things? And he would just comment like, you don't understand. You don't get it. And I'm like, no, I don't. I understand. You need to just stop. Like, I understand you have a problem. You need to stop. So coming from the place of the other side, because we are family, we're concerned and, we don't want this to happen to others in that moment. So letting them know you're an ear to listen, that you love them, you're scared of what could be, but coming from a different angle, not anger in that you can stop this. Why are you doing this? But also sharing resources. Maybe you know your siblings well. Like, what do they find value in doing? What excites them? What kind of hobbies do they have? And helping them find those resources, because more than likely they're not looking for those resources unless they're really ready to get clean and sober. So just sharing information, but also, in that struggle is that they also have to somewhat want to work on themselves too. So just be in that safe space for them, but also that you're along for this journey. But it's tough. I mean, it's really because every case is so different. Every person's personality is different. It's hard to really say in that because I definitely feel like I did not do anything the right way when he was going through all that.
Yeah, because you're just looking at it as a person without that disorder, and you can't understand how their brain is working.
Right.
You
You
know,
have no
and
idea.
I think you have no idea what their brain's been hijacked and their pathways, the neurological science of it. If you could understand that, I think it would be easier to sit with them and listen to what they have to say and not just say, fix it.
Right.
And as a mom, I was just like, go to your room, clean your room, go to school. And oh, by the way, quit doing drugs, if you just like, and that doesn't help at all.
Yeah.
I think a lot of us did it wrong just from not understanding what they're living in. And, no addict wakes up and wants to be an addict.
Right. Right.
So, and listening is such a huge, you don't feel like you're doing enough sometimes when you're just listening to people,
I agree.
but you are. Yeah.
Yeah. Just
You're giving them a place.
Mhm. It's huge. And just from the
that-
sibling aspect is, I mean, that's hard, especially, if you're not that we weren't close, but also like not knowing how you can be or what you can say and not overstepping but don't be quiet, because that's almost the worst thing you can do is not being of any source of comfort to them. And also trying to understand, for a lot of individuals, there's been something that has happened that has led to where they are, and having very vulnerable conversations if they're open to it and not being scared. Because I think sometimes people are scared to have those vulnerable conversations, but they're so needed.
Yeah, we just get in a mindset of denial too. Like that's not going to happen to our family, surely that's not going to be the case here. So, in your opinion, is a lot of this genetic? Do you think you have an opinion on how someone becomes? You're both from the same parents. Do you see it as a predestined genetic disease, or how do you feel about it?
I feel like initially, yes, but I feel like over time, I'm kind of in the middle now with just different research that's come out, with just different people sharing their experiences and what happens in the environment they were raised in. Because a lot of them had parents that didn't use and were in great houses and were well loved. And so it's hard for me to say after all these years, but definitely when everything happened, I just assumed, oh, it's in the family, it's part of it, or you know, but there was so
Yeah.
much more that came to light over these years. And I think just being open to different scenarios of why it happens and what can cause it. My perspective on life and things has definitely broadened and grew a lot. I definitely am very in the middle on a lot of things where I was very like, no, this is the only way. This is it. Because I've just had to grow and learn in the grief and loss around substance use, specifically, and more stuff comes out. So it's hard to know, like, oh, is this really what it was or no? Um, so I just trying to be more open because I think every person is different.
Maybe just more accepting to
Yeah.
it wasn't one way or another. It's just there's a lot of gray area there, and just not being judgmental. That's the big takeaway.
Absolutely. Yeah. Because at my time at Phoenix, we had everyone from every culture, every background, every profession, every age come in and share stories, and they were all so different. And it really opens your mind to it. That wow, it's a wow factor. I think the most I grew around substance use was actually putting myself out there in the industry, or in that type of nonprofit, and fully understanding it more. Because had I not, associate in other, and there's been plenty of other nonprofits too that I helped kind of just learn about and outreach. I don't think I would be where I'm at right now in my grief around his death and just substance use in general. I think I'd be a different person, and it wouldn't be a nice, open person either. Definitely a lot more judgmental back then than I am today.
Yeah, it really stretches who you are. There's a lot of self-analyzing that goes on when you lose someone too, so close to you, because we immediately think we could control it,
Yep.
and we don't really have that much control. So you have a great testimony. When I listen to your story, I'm just so impressed with what you've done. I'm sure there were a lot of things God shared you in that too, but just being willing to get out there and volunteer so much.
Yeah.
It's huge.
The volunteering definitely was huge for me. And then, we put on a poker tournament each year on his birthday because he loved playing poker. And each year we picked a different nonprofit for the charities to go to. And we did that for the first 10 years. We started that immediately that birthday after, he passed in September, that February, we put on a poker tournament. And in that time when we're planning it, we're just like, okay, we're gonna do something good in his memory and raise some funds, and it'll be a great way to celebrate his birthday. What came from that was at a magnitude we never imagined, just bringing people together that knew Jeff from all different backgrounds that came out just for that, to share stories about him. We didn't even imagine like the storytelling time that would come, or, that people knew how he passed now at that time, and sharing their personal stories, and how much more so myself. My parents honestly were not really fond of me talking about how he had passed. There was a lot more shame and stigma for them as parents, because you're definitely perceived as you're an enabler. You let him, like there's just so much stigma that comes to that too. And these shameful things people can say. And so my parents didn't really want that out there, but I knew that's, my God wink was that I knew I needed to talk about it, not just for other families, but for myself too. And knowing that we might not be able to prevent all this from happening for other families, but the more you talk about it, the more people are aware, and the more it's out there and it's prevalent. And so we had a lot of people come forward that were glad we shared our stories, but also with sharing that, we had a lot of more people who were very understanding of why we were how we were after his, like with me isolating and not wanting to be around people. It opened a lot more doors by having this event in his honor that we kind of just treated as like a minimal thing. We're going to do this for his birthday. It's going to be great. But so much more came out of that. And so we continued it for 10 years because it was so impactful, not only for our family, but for these nonprofits we raised the dollars for, but the community. Because we're sharing a story and everything each time. And that kept growing. There's definitely a lot of things that can come from that that you wouldn't imagine. So I always tell families that if you can try and, when you're in your grief and you feel like you're drowning, a thing that was helpful for our family was just putting on events or doing something in their memory that gave back to the community, because there's so much that could come from it. As hard as it is to do that, there's so much more joy rewarded that comes from it.
Yeah. It's a huge return. And you don't even know, like you said, you have no idea what's gonna transpire from it. But when they're telling the stories about your brother too, I mean, that's a gift to hear those stories. And you hear things you've never heard, I'm sure.
Where they're like, well, we probably shouldn't tell you, but we're going to. Like, oh, this is gonna be
Right. Yeah. And what was he like? What qualities did he have, his personality? And if you can kind of sum him up.
Yeah, and, as a sibling, we focus on, like, the honorary, the banter and the fights and the, "Oh, he annoyed me with this," but, he was 6'5", big, solid man, just built, but he was like a huge teddy bear. He was very caring and kind and very sarcastic and funny, and, I finally got to experience that as we got older, but through his friends, you found out he was more of that friend that everyone knew that they could trust and was that safe person. And I knew that as a sibling because your sibling's your safe person. But to hear, like, when his friends were going through things, he was one that they trusted to sit and listen or to offer some form of advice. Whereas me, I was like, no, he didn't. He didn't talk that much. There's no way that was. But then you said, just like, oh, there was always friends over hanging out with him, chatting. There was always girls who confided in him through breakups and things like that. So definitely a very kind individual, even as a big man. He was a big softie, and he loved. He definitely loved everyone around him, though he didn't show it externally. You knew it. You knew it internally, and he was an amazing uncle, especially with Kylie. Having Down syndrome for some people that is hard, it's scary, and he embraced it and loved it. So, just very
A
very
wonderful
caring,
guy.
kind, but very sarcastic and funny, and would tell it like it was, especially to me. So his friends might not got the homes. I definitely got.
Yeah. He was a huge blessing to your life.
Yeah.
Yeah. We just never know how long we're going to have. And 24 years you had your brother. And at some point in grief, you do try to find that gratitude. I think that's really healing, just to look back and say, what if I'd have never experienced all those years with him? So,
Absolutely.
and then you can quit being mad at God, eventually too. That's a good thing.
Yeah.
So you've just made this podcast so easy, Bree. You just can talk. I know you could talk for hours about all of this, and you do it so well. I appreciate it.
I appreciate you.
Well, you've got so much wisdom, and besides journaling, was there any books that really did you find the book or did your therapist point you to those type of things too when you're in therapy?
She had shared with you.
The self.
I'm not a reader. I'm really bad. My attention span in books is not very good. So I've never been a reader. I'm working on it to this day still. So I'm 41. Still working on it.
You're always busy.
Right. So I threw myself into the volunteer work that kind of, they say you always have free time to exercise. Not you do. You do have time for all that. I didn't make time for reading. I really just leaned on music. I didn't really read. I wish I would have. I think it definitely would have helped me a lot. I actually could go downstairs and I probably have 15 books that people had bought for me during that time. My mom had bought me several Christian books for me to read around grief and loss, and I refused to read them. But I kept them because I do want to read them someday. But I didn't read any books. I really, Kylie, therapy, and I shut out a lot of other things for a long time in that. But now I'm embracing everything. So it then you don't know what to do. Like there's no grief, there's no manual to grief. So I didn't think a book was gonna help me. I was kind of selfish, thinking I got this. I have this handled. I'll just do it on my own. I'm resilient. I don't need I wasn't open to other things, honestly. The fact I went to therapy and actually showed up was pretty shocking.
Which, yeah.
The only main things I definitely showed up for was Kylie, my job, because I had to keep a job, and how they kept me employed. I was kind of a mess during that time. And my instrumental music, because I could create my own words to it and my own lyrics that
I've never heard anyone say that. That's just great. Great idea because those lyrics don't get in the way
Mhm.
of what you're.
But now when I listen to some of those songs, those lyrics like really would have hit home then. And one of the main songs that I lose it every time is Lauren Daigle's Rescue because like every single fact of the I'm like, oh, but it wasn't, I mean, it wasn't out in, that came out in, I think, 2018, but there was so much good music and scriptures and books and so much I could have found value and helped me, but I wasn't open to that. I thought I could handle everything on my own, but I was also just so angry. And most of the time, the anger is at the loved one. My anger was at God. My anger was like, in what realm did you think this needed to be done to others?
Yeah.
Like there's families every day, multiple families going through this, sadly. And I also didn't have a community around me that shared any. At that time, I was in a community that was like, let's go solve that and go to the bar, So, I mean, actually, I'm missing a huge part because we suppressed that. Also, what helped me is I went out with people who weren't really even that good of friends and drank. So I would go out and my parents would watch Kylie. So I definitely, there was a time in my life where that was also a crutch. And I tend to black that part out too from back then because that was not me during all that.
Well, you don't recognize yourself. Sometimes your actions are so different than because before you lose that person and there's after, and sometimes the after is like, I don't know who this new person is,
Right.
because you're in so much pain that you have to find a way to breathe. You have to find a way to get up. You have to find a way to put in one foot in front of the other. And sometimes the way we do that is not always healthy.
Right.
You also can kind of with me, I almost could feel what she was dealing with. Like in my grief, I actually could feel the pain and the shame and the fear and all that, those emotions she was dealing with in addiction. It was kind of funny how I kind of relate more to how she felt.
Right. And, in my time doing things, it was no better than them taking some pills. I was not making great choices. There's some nights that it could have been, bad and turned out not good. So, you don't recognize yourself for a while. And I definitely had a period there where I had no identity and was putting myself in places and with people who didn't care about me personally as the person, but rather this party person that could have fun was all that ended. Because did I hear from them after a few, nights after not going out anywhere? No. Do I hear from them today?
Yep.
No. Did they ever show up to those poker tournaments? No. Have they ever reached out on the anniversaries? No. There's only a few people that are always there. And I definitely didn't appreciate them as I should have during, those immediate days, months, and years.
Yeah. Well, your parents have a wonderful daughter and your kids have a great mom, and your husband's got a beautiful wife that's just so much bigger, better, and relatable than probably who you were at 24, I'm sure.
Yes. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah. So when you play poker, you think of Jeff immediately, I'm sure, if you still play poker.
When I can, I definitely, with having the 2 extra kiddos now, so having 3, I don't have as much free time because, those kids' activities take over and I have a lot more appreciation for my parents for all the things they let me do for activities because you don't realize it then, like, it's a lot of work, time and money. But yes, I still try to play. We had a set group of poker friends who played with my brother as well. And actually, I missed giving them some credit because they were definitely there through everything. And they came to every poker tournament. They invited me to all the poker events. And they're like brothers to me. They're like a set of brothers. So we still play. One of my goals to do in Jeff's memory is to play in the World Series of Poker in Las Vegas. I need to work on my skills a little more because I don't want to embarrass him if I go and don't do well.
I have a friend actually that is a poker coach in Vegas.
Oh,
He works at the Venetian. That is his job. Yeah.
wow.
So I might just send you his card.
Yes.
That's his profession. But I know Jeff is very proud of who you are and what you've done with the 17 years of grief. And I'm sure he's smiling down on you. If he came back for one day, would you play poker or would you just sit there? And I always think if I could have one day with Lacey, what would I do?
Oh, definitely poker. I would have to have it. And it would because I beat him that last night. So he would want revenge.
He'd won the last game. Yeah.
And then it's probably getting your journal out and adding like, hey, we never talked about this type of stuff. Like, but I find value in that now. So having deep conversations that maybe make us a little uncomfortable and vulnerable with our family and loved ones, but to be able to look back on those things would be, important because I mean, even like favorite ice cream flavor, I'm like, did he like ice cream? He was pretty picky, but so just even simple things to remember that is so important.
That's so good. Yeah. And getting uncomfortable in a conversation is a good idea because you want to know that person really, really well and don't take it for granted you'll get the time later. So that's a good message. And I'm glad you're listening to Lauren Daigle. She's my favorite. I love that woman. She's amazing.
Yeah.
Well, you've given us so much. In the podcast notes, I'm going to put the Phoenix link. Anything else that I can add there for people to go to?
There's a lot of links we could add. I mean, I know you probably already have words you're associated with, but you want to think on that because I feel like there's a lot. You can never have too many resources for someone.
No, you can't. So we'll add those as they come to us. And I'm just so grateful that we met and you've done this great. You've done a great service to people that are listening. My two sons are siblings that lost their sister and they don't talk about it a lot. We talk about her a lot,
Right.
But how they actually feel, it doesn't come up as much as I wish it did. But yeah, you've done a great job here. So
Thank you.
I sure appreciate you.
Same with you. We've talked about, since I met you, where you wanted to get with your journey with Lacey, and here we are. So listen, I love this, and so proud of you and everything.
Yeah, God, it's all God. He gives me the ideas, and I don't even like to talk or see myself on the camera. So when they kept challenging me to do this, I was like, surely it's not going to be me that does a podcast. That's ridiculous. But I think of Joe Rogan doing a podcast, not myself. But God will bring you to it and he'll give you the comfort to step out there. So
absolutely.
Which
you do an amazing job and you're beautiful. I don't think you should have any worry about how you look on camera.
Well, you know how we are as women. We're picking ourselves apart. But well, thank you, Bree. I want to see you in person soon. And you're just a blessing to everyone that knows you. So
thank you.
I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Yes, we'll get that in person happening soon.
Okay. Take care.
Thanks.
Thank you so much for joining us today and for being a part of the Grief, Grace, and Gratitude community. Remember, God has not forgotten you, your dreams, or your broken heart. Join us for our next episode, available wherever you listen to podcasts. To help us reach more people, please like, share, subscribe, leave a review, and follow us on social media. Those links are in the show notes. What will you trust God with today?